Well, good morning. This week, I, in preparation of Mother's Day, was kind of scouring the internet to see all the great things they were saying and things I could use. And I came across this picture, and the gal who posted it writes this. She says, scrolling through my Instagram feed, I see a beautiful, spotless kitchen with a pottery vase full of fresh-cut flowers, set on a wooden trivet. I glance up, she says, at my own kitchen, and I see dishes piled in the sink, on the counter, and still on the table from last night's dinner. Then she looks at the picture again. She says, the square full of smiling children wear gorgeous coordinated outfits reminds me that the quote-unquote backup outfits in my diaper bag need to be replaced because, well, they were used as backup. And looking at the picture, that shot of a drool-worthy meal in a white bowl set on a white tablecloth, she writes, puts my lunch to shame, which consisted of scraps I snatched off my kids' plates. And then she says, let's be honest, I have no white linens because nothing white stays white very long in my house. I think Mother's Day is one of those days that we put a good face on it, and we should. There's a lot that's seen. It's good to take a day, whether it's mothers, fathers, teachers, presidents, police officers, whatever you may name it. It's good to pay attention to folks who live a life of service. And I don't know there's any greater life of service than a good mom. Not all of us had a good mom, but then the life of service that a good mom makes. But oftentimes we kind of paint this magazine picture. And while everyone is doing that, mom kind of feels shame because it does not match the picture. And so today I actually want to start focusing on moms, imperfect but noteworthy moms. So I'm going to take you to an unusual place. You can look up your Bible, but it will come up on the screen. The very first chapter of Matthew 1, most of us read right through this. Because it starts out, says, here's a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And of course, you know what's going to come next. So-and-so begat so-and-so who begat so-and-so, this lineage thing. And most of us just kind of glaze over, like, I don't even know why they put that in there. But what it attests to is a couple things. The lineage attests to, first of all, pedigree, right? It's kind of like if you're looking for a good lawyer, if they've been to Yale or Harvard, or a good doctor, they studied it at Stanford. You know, that's a good pedigree. The other thing is prerequisite. In order to be the Christ, the Messiah, the hero, you had to be a descendant specifically of David, who was a descendant of Abraham. And so in essence, this establishes Jesus' pedigree. It establishes his authenticity. If this was not his lineage, he could not be the Messiah. However, the writer does something sneaky. Like the books of old, if you go into the Hebrew scriptures, they track lineages. All this, by the way, the reason the Old Testament tracks lineages is because there are 12, remember, tribes, 12 Jewish families, and there's certain land and things that belong to each tribe. So if you can't claim your lineage, you can't claim land. And that was the economics. So it was very, very important. But he does something different in that all the Hebrew scriptures, they trace the guy, the father, so-and-so, 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 and so-and-so. But the writer, Matthew, when he writes, he throws in 4 moms who are noteworthy. But they each have a history, let's say. Let's just look at that really quickly. Later on, starting in verse 3, it says, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, first mom. Solomon, the father of Boaz, whose mother, second mom, was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother, third mom, was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife, fourth mom, Bathsheba. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba are the 4 moms that are just kind of added in this genealogy. And it's amazing on several accounts. First of all, it's amazing because they were added. In one way, it's unnecessary. But it's extremely honoring. But there's another undercurrent here. These gals all come with a past. They all come with issues. They are noteworthy. They are amazing moms. They are in the genealogy of Jesus. But if you go back and read their stories, one sleeps with her father-in-law, bears illegitimate children out of wedlock, adultery, prostitution. These are great moms, but they are far from having their kitchen look really nice. Today, as we look at close encounters, what happens in our lives when we encounter God, we're going to look at one of these famous moms, Rahab. We're going to look at her life and see what her life was, her encounter with God, and what her life became. This famous mom who is recorded in the genealogy of Jesus. Now to start, I want to kind of give you the big picture so you kind of know where this all fits in. So I'll go to our standard little graph here. Hopefully you can read this more and more as I'm sitting out there. I can't anymore, but hopefully you can. But if you got creation, that's the tree. You have when Christ returns and we're restored into his heavenly kingdom. At the very end, that's the throne. And of course, the only way we can get there is through the cross and the resurrection. In the beginning, one of the highlights was the promise. That's Abraham. And we talked about God coming to using Joseph in terms of getting the Israelites into Egypt. And remember slavery, and we talked about how Moses got them out. And then God gave them the law. That's the next peak. And then after giving them the law, he led them into the promised land. And then, of course, when they got into the promised land, they were established. Last week we talked about Gideon. Okay, that's between the law and where it says self, because everybody did what was right in their own eyes. We talked a little bit about that last week. We're going to back the truck up. We're going to talk about as they enter into the promised land. When God brought them out, he told Moses, if you remember, hey, I'm going to bring you out. And one of the specific reasons is to bring you into your own place, into your own land. And so we're going to kind of back up. What happened was they came to the edge of the promised land. They sent some folks in, and they checked it out. And they came back and said, we got 2 things to say. Number one, it's fantastic. The food, the resources, we want to live there. It's better than Santana Row. I threw that in. The Bible doesn't say that. They said there's only one problem. The people that live there are huge and strong. And in their sight, we're like grasshoppers. We could be stomped. Now 12 representatives from each of the tribes went in. And those 12 representatives came out. 10 of them gave this report. We cannot do it. 2 said, forget it. Yes, they're right. The report is right. But we can do it because God's with us. I mean, we went through the Red Sea. He miraculously provided food. Then obviously he's going to give us the land. And then they did, and take this in the right way, what often does not lead to a good thing in the Bible. They took a vote. They took a vote. They asked the people. And the people assessed on their reasoning the situation and said, no way, we won't go. And so God said, okay, 40 years in the desert. And the reason it was 40 years is because he waited for that generation that said no to die off. And a new generation, except for those 2 spies. So they're the only ones who lived. Only ones who got to enter into the promised land were the 2 spies who came back and said, no, we can take the land. Isn't that something? And so now they're just about to enter into, and they're going to have to battle. They're going to have to fight. And to kind of give you a behind-the-scenes story, when God was promising and saying that later on to Abraham, later on he said, you're going to be able to go into this land. He says, but not now. The reason why was because the folks weren't evil enough. He gave them time to repent. He gave them time to change, and they did not. And we'll talk a little bit about their evilness. So anyhow, so they're ready to go in, and so Joshua does what Moses did. He wants to spy out the land. He needs to know about it, but he's smarter. He handpicks two people. Two people kind of like the two spies that had faith. And he sends them in, and he says, and when you come back, I don't want you to tell nobody else what's going on. You just tell me. And so we pick up in Joshua chapter 2. If you have your Bible, you can open up. Otherwise, again, it'll come up on the screen. The very first verse, it says, then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent two spies from Hittim and said, go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho, because that was the first major city. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Now, this is the background we know for Rahab. Number one, we know she comes from bad religion. She is of the Canaanites. She is of this area. And as we have more and more archaeological evidence, we have biblical evidence too, we find out that this was definitely, you think San Francisco has anything goes values. This is much, much worse. There is ancient evidence that indicates that they practiced child sacrifice, that part of their worship was prostitution. It was a daily thing. When you wanted to worship your God, you slept with a prostitute. And there was lying and cheating and to the nth degree. Not, we're used to that. We live in the Bay Area, of course. But I'm talking just to the degree where it is just a cesspool. She comes from bad religion. But not only that, she has a bad occupation. It says flat out she was a prostitute. That was how she made her living. It doesn't say anything about how she got into that, whether her choice or forced into it, but that is part of her identity. That is, if you would, Rahab's backstory. That's all we know. But then Rahab encounters God. She has an encounter with God. And it's an interesting encounter. It's very different than the ones that we've experienced so far, where Moses experienced God in the bush, Joseph in a dream. Gideon had an angel of the Lord himself come and visit him. Rahab actually seems to encounter God much the way maybe you and I would, by reputation and by observing what he does. And it starts with a cover-up. The two spies enter into Jericho. Now they are spying out. They're seeing how big the walls are, how many people there are, everything a good spy would do. And as they enter the city, they want to be incognito. So, of course, where would a stranger go and kind of blend in? The house of prostitution. And so that's where they go. But whether someone recognizes them or overhears them, we don't know. All we know is that the king finds out that these two spies, there are two people that represent the people of Israel, and they're at the prostitute's house. And so he sends his soldiers to get them. Now Rahab somehow knows about this. She heard maybe the talk when someone says, go tell the king they're here. And so the first thing she does is she tells the men that they're coming, and she hides them. She takes them to the top of the roof, and she's drying some stuff on the top of her roof because it's a warm day. And she puts them down, and she lays all the flax over them so you can't tell they're there. And then the knock comes on the door, and she rushes down. And they say, we know the spies are here. Bring them out. And she denies that they're even there. Now, she does say, hey, they were here. Absolutely, they were here. But when the sun was about to set and the gates were about to close, they left right at that moment. And they headed toward the gate. And the soldiers were thinking, oh, they must have ran out. And so they quickly head to the gates, and they begin to go down the road looking for the spies. She protects them. And then we find out in a proclamation of faith why. Joshua chapter 2, starting in verse 8, it says this. It says, before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and she said to them, I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who lived in this country are melting in fear because of you. Now you gotta understand the city of Jericho is a stronghold. It says that the walls were so wide that chariots could actually race on top of the walls. That's how huge it was. It was impregnable. And so the only way that Jericho was going to fall was if the Israelites surrounded it and kind of starved them out. And that usually took a year, 2. But here, she makes a proclamation. I know what the Lord's going to do. I know what he's capable of. And she explains why, starting in verse 10. She says, we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. Here it is. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. There's a couple amazing things here. First of all, what's always amazing to me is how outsiders see and appreciate the power and grace of God more than those of us who grew up in it. The people of Israel were constantly struggling with following God and mixing with other things because they just forgot. But here's this outsider. She wasn't raised in it. She knew exactly what all those things meant. She knew exactly that all those things added up to all these gods of the Canaanites worship. All these gods of the Canaanites sometimes gave their own children to. Amounted to nothing. They weren't gods at all. But when she saw what the God of Israel did, when she saw that the drunks became dry, I'm modernizing it. When she saw the lost became found. When she saw that the greedy became emptying. She understood there is one God. And he's God not only of the heavens, but he's God on earth. And it was the great I am. The God of the Israelites. Verse 12, now then, she said, based on this, based on my confession, please swear to me by the Lord, by your God, that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and my mother and my brothers and sister and all who belong to him, and that you will save us from this death. Based on her confession. So then this is what she does. She waits till it's really, really late at night. No one's expecting them. She has all this scarlet red cloth, probably used to clothe the prostitutes. She ties it up, lowers it down, because she lives in the wall itself. So she lowers them out a window. And as she's lowering them out, they say, this cloth that you're letting us down, when we take the city, you make sure that this cloth is hanging out your window. So that when we come back and we see that, we know that anyone here, you, your brothers, your sisters, your mother, your father, your family, anyone that's in here, in this room, will be spared. But anyone who's left outside of this, out of this room that's marked by the scarlet cloth, is going to be obliterated. And then not only does she let them down, but she tells them, she says, listen, what you need to do is you need to head to the hills. Wait 3 days. This is what normally happens. They will search for you for 3 days. Head to those hills. They're really close. Hide in a cave for 3 days, and then you'll be free to go. And they make their deal, and off they go. What's interesting is Rahab shows up later on after Christ. James writes this about her act of faith. He's writing about how important it is to act on our faith, act on what we believe. He says, in the same way, verse 25, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. What James is saying is, he says, you want an example what faith is? Listen, everybody in Jericho believed that God was going to deliver Jericho into their hands. She said that. She said, we all fear. We all believe that your God is God. We all fear that. But there was only one person who believed enough to act on it. I mean, we live in a culture where, especially in the United States, most people actually do believe in God. And believe it or not, most people actually believe in Jesus. They just don't act on it. But Rahab is an example of faith in that what she believed, she acted on. She put her own life at risk. Because deep down, she truly believed that God was the God. And he was to be served. From this act of faith, we see Rahab gain new life. A completely new life. We pick up the story in Joshua 6. It is really interesting. What happens is, this is their first battle in the promised land. And God kind of says, I got this one. They'll fight others kind of regularly, like regular battles are fought. But this one, God kind of says, I want to set the tone. I got this one. So he sends an angel. He says, I got a great military plan for you. He says, this is what I want you to do. He says, for the next 6 days, I want you to take the Ark of the Covenant, which represents the presence of God. I want you to surround it with trumpets, musical instruments. I want you to put a great army in front of it and a great army behind it, but the center of this is the Ark of the Covenant. And I want you to march around the walls. That's it. I don't want anyone to say anything. I just want them to hear the trumpets sounding off to me. So for 6 days, that's all they do. Once a day, they file out, the trumpets blast, and they march around the city. Now, you got to imagine that the guards were not on top. The first day, they're all worried. The second day, they're just jeering. They're like, this is the weirdest siege we've ever seen. And then on the seventh day, here's the plan. On the seventh day, he says, we're ready for action. And you know we're ready for action because I want you to go around the city 7 times. Now, this isn't a small city. This takes time. And so they march around the city 7 times. And on the 7th time, when they're done with the 7th time, the trumpets blow, and everyone is then, for the first time, everyone was to speak and shout unto the Lord. And so they do this. We pick it up in Joshua chapter 6, verse 20. When the trumpet sounded, the people shouted at the sound of the trumpet. When the people gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So every man charged straight in, and they took the city. Now, if you're really new to this, maybe even if you're not, you're probably going, that's a great story. You know, like Cinderella. It makes a good point. And the truth is, in the era of enlightenment, that's kind of how they treated this. Oh, that's a great story. And someone said, you know what I'm going to do? We're going to go find that location. We're going to dig it up, and we're going to prove that there is no Jericho. And guess what they found? Jericho. And by the way, guess the other unusual thing that they found? The walls of Jericho had fallen out, not in. Completely unusual. There's other things that they found you can look up that kind of says what scoffers would say didn't happen. The Bible said did happen. The proof is there. Here's the other miracle, though. It's not just that they shouted and the walls fell down. That is incredible. But remember, Rahab lived in the wall. The scarlet cloth that came out her window was right there on the wall. So apparently the entire wall fell down except for where Rahab lived. God miraculously saves her. And as they begin to charge in, Joshua says, go and destroy everything, but go to the home. He told the 2 spies, go to the home of Rahab, fulfill the promise that we made to her. and bring all her family out. So her family was spared. Joshua 6:22. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother and brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. They were all saved. They were all saved. But Rahab just wasn't saved. She was saved to a new life, because the very next verse of the last part of 6:25 says this, "But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua and sent his spies to Jericho." And this is a very important last sentence. "And she lives among the Israelites to this day." The reason that it's important is because at the end of 23, it said they put Rahab and her family outside the camp. See, Gentiles, non-Jews, those who weren't the children of God, could not be inside the Israeli camp. It was holy. It was God's presence. And so they put the family on the outskirts of the camp, so not to offend God. And yet in verse 25, it says Rahab herself now lives among the Israelites. Why? Because part of her new life, she became a child of God. So much so that when we talk about Jesus and his lineage, we make sure to add her. We make sure to add her. We make sure to honor this famous mom who gave birth to a son, who would give birth to a son, who would give birth to David, the great king of Israel, who's promised that from his descendants, David's descendants, the Christ would come, who would reign on that throne forever, eternally. She once was a rejected, lowly, pagan woman. But after encountering God, Rahab became a precious child of God, who is an example of faith for all generations. The writer of Hebrews says this as well. Again, as he's trying to encourage the Christians, stay strong. It is tough. You're being persecuted. Economically, you're just not thriving. You're seeing your brothers and your sisters die for their faith. Stay strong. And he does this by consider those of old. Consider the heroes of the faith. Hebrews chapter 11. Verse 30 says this, by faith, because people believed, because they stood strong, because they acted on that belief. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the people had marched around them for 7 days. Verse 31, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. She became from, if you would, a cautionary tale you might tell your children. Don't follow this road because you may end up like Rahab the prostitute. 2, follow God so that someday maybe you'll become like Rahab the prostitute. Now, I want you to notice something. Except for the chapter in Matthew, Rahab is always identified as Rahab the prostitute. And this is something that's unique about the Christian life. See, in the world, when we try to renew ourselves, remake ourselves, we try to envision a new dream, we just kind of deny anything that happened, any bad part. It's just focus on the positive. Just focus on who you want to be. But in God's kingdom, though we do become new, though we do have a new identity, and we're about to talk about that, in God's kingdom, the old is always remembered in contrast of what God has become, of the new that we've become. We remember the old. Paul's constantly saying this, remember what you used to be. Because it highlights how good God is and where you are now. And so Rahab, after she encountered God, she got a new God, and that resulted in a new life. And that's a true for us too. For those who follow Jesus, For those who encounter God through him, we have new life. Our lives change. Your life changes. My life changes. And it begins with the whole idea of what identity is. The dictionary identifies identity as the condition or character as to who a person is, the qualities, beliefs, etc., that distinguish or identify a person or thing. See, in the old, Rahab was identified as a prostitute. In the new, she's identified as one who has faith. She is not defined by the old. She may be glorified in contrast to the old, but her new identity is not defined by the old. One of the things I love about this church, and you might find this weird, one of the things I love about this church is that we have a lot of old and now new people. As a pastor, I get to hear stories. And so I know the stories. The people that are amongst you used to be alcoholics. The people amongst you used to be exotic dancers. The people amongst you had abortions, gave up their children because of their addiction of drugs. The people amongst you made really terrible decisions and treated people poorly. And the people amongst you really had no care or concern for others at all. It was all about their achievement. Yes, they're on your right and left and up on stage. But the one redeeming factor amongst us too is that at some point we encountered God. Paul writes about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. He says, your identity used to be that you were sexually immoral, idolaters, prostitutes, homosexual offenders, thieves, greedy, drunkards, abusive, swindlers. He says, this used to be your identity, but now, he says, you are washed, you are sanctified, you are justified in the name of our Lord Jesus the Christ, and by the Spirit of our God. You are now new. In his next letter to the Corinthians, he would say this, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, she is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. That is who you and I are. Messy kitchens and all. Messy lives and all. Shameful past and all. Even, by the way, a shameful present and all. With Christ, we are made new. And the old begins to more and more serve as a reminder of God's grace rather than our identity. There was a man, Newton. He was the captain of a ship that captured men and women from Africa to become slaves in America during the mid-18th century. He gave little thought to the enormous suffering experienced by his human cargo as they were torn from home and families and herded below decks of his ship. He didn't think about his sins against humanity or the sins against himself. The interesting thing is Newton was known among sailors as being foul. Think about that. He was known among slavers as being foul. That's how bad Newton was. And then one day, the ship gets into a storm, a terrible storm. And he walks a couple feet, and where he used to be, just seconds later, another guy was, and the ocean whisks him away. And he and another guy tie themselves to the ship so they're not to be tossed and fro. And he just inadvertently says, if this doesn't work, then may God have mercy. And the captain then puts him on the steering wheel. As the waves come, as people are drowning, and he begins to reflect on what he just said about God have mercy. And on that day, in the distress, he encounters God. He realized his very soul was in distress. And in some time, he began to see himself with new eyes. He also began to see others with new eyes, and later began to fight against slavery. He found that he was doomed, but by God's grace in Jesus Christ, he could find forgiveness. And as he matured and grew and began to be an advocate for the God who forgave, he penned a song that you may be familiar with called Amazing Grace by John Newton. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. When we encounter God, when we encounter God and his amazing grace, at that moment, at that time, you and I have new life. New life. In the face of imperfection. In the face of our past. In the face of our current situation. We are new. We are God's. We become victorious.